All right. All right. Hello and welcome to CAREapy. These webinars are produced by the Committee on Audience Research and Evaluation, which is one of the American Alliance of Museums professional networks. Sorry, I am going to garble my words all of today, it seems. These CAREapy webinars are intended to connect our members and share professional expertise. My name is Erica Kwam. I'm with Purdue Galleries in West Lafayette, Indiana. And today we'll be talking about the Science Museum of Minnesota's NSF grant-funded initiative titled Research With, Not On. And just a few quick housekeeping tips before we start. We are recording today's session and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So in the meantime, I'm going to keep you on mute while the presenters are presenting. Please enter any questions you have into chat and then we'll address them during and after the conversation. At the end, you would also be welcome to take yourself off mute and ask the questions yourself, but we will have time for that Q&A at the end. We also plan on making this webinar available on AAM's YouTube, and it should be available within 3 to 6 weeks, so keep an eye out for that. These webinars are kept free of charge, so we'd like to encourage you to consider joining AAM and the Committee on Audience Research and Evaluation as a member. And with that, I'll turn it over to Marjorie Bequette with the Science Museum of Minnesota. Thanks for presenting today, Marjorie.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you to CARE and to AAM for having us here to talk with all of you. I am really excited to be here with my co-presenters. We are going to talk about this project, which is a strong community museum partnership that includes a strong research angle. So our goal here today is to actually spend enough time understanding the project itself so you can see the context in which the research happens, spend a little bit more time digging into our research principles, and most of all, to highlight the voices of our community members who are part of this project. So before I go any further, I'm going to ask my fellow presenters to briefly unmute themselves and introduce themselves. And I think Chao was going to go first.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share our perspectives today. My name is Chao Mwatela. I live in Rochester, Minnesota, but I am originally from Kenya, which is in East Africa. So to this particular project, I bring the identity of an immigrant, of a woman of color, and as a parent of a young teenage daughter. Thank you.
We can go in order. Choua, do you want to go next?
I'm like, is it afternoon or evening or what time is it anymore? Hi, everyone. I'm Choua. I work at the Science Museum as an evaluation and research associate, and I have the pleasure and the blessing of being a part of this project from its beginning. And so I'm excited to talk more about what we've been doing so far with this work together.
David.
Hey folks, I'm David Valentine. I am a community engagement specialist with the Science Museum of Minnesota, and I focus primarily on working with BIPOC communities and pushing forward equitable work. This has been a really exciting project, and I'm excited to tell you all about it.
Last but not least, Coach Rob.
Hello, everyone. My name is Coach Rob. I live in Rochester, Minnesota. And I am affiliated with Minnesota Teen Challenge. And I also this project has been really special to me because through all of its inception, it has really been a great experience. And it's something that I really look forward to talking about.
So we are going to hear a lot from all of those folks today. As we get started, I am going to give you just a couple of grounding principles to understand the nature of this project. So the title of the project is Advancing Conversations That Intersect STEM and Racial Justice. We got funding from the National Science Foundation through the rapid line of funding, which means it's work that has to happen immediately and has to happen quickly. And our work really is situated in response to the national, but really also local to Minnesota events of the past year, the murder of George Floyd, the ongoing issues with systemic inequality and racial injustice in our country. And this project was really designed to bring together community members with strong expertise in racial justice and a museum that has worked explicitly with and towards racial justice and also with STEM to bring these strengths together. We established community groups in 3 locations, the Twin Cities, Rochester, Minnesota, and Fargo-Moorhead, which is right on the boundary of Minnesota. Each of those places has its own individual context and individual needs. In each location, we have 5 community members who form a subgroup, and then those subgroups work together at times. And we asked each of those groups to draw on their resources and our resources, which included financial resources, payment for their time, as well as funds for them to develop new things, and ask them to develop an activity or an event that would advance racial justice in their communities. And we have a website. It is a simple, not fancy website. I just want you to have your expectations at the level of my web design skills. But what we've been doing is really aiming to share resources as we develop them, to not wait till the end when everything was perfect, but just to put stuff up there, because we know that many museums are working on projects like this in response to the past year and the many, many years that predated that. And whether that is about how to do programming or how to do research, we didn't want to hold anything back. Throughout this project, this webinar, we are going to use a couple of acronyms, and we just wanted to have them ready for you so we don't have to keep on defining them over and over again. STEM-RJ is what we call our project, STEM and racial justice. It's our shorthand for the work that we are doing together. Chao and Coach Rob are 2 of our many regional project group members, and that's a little bit of a mouthful. So sometimes we just call them community members. Sometimes we will call them Chao and Coach Rob on this call because they are the ones who are here, but sometimes we call them RPGMs. And so if you hear that acronym, that corresponds to the role that Chao and Coach Rob play. And SMM is what we call the museum. So if there are other questions or we get into acronym speak, please let us know as we go. But now what I'm going to do is turn it over to Chao and Coach Rob to talk about, from their perspective, about the partnership between the community and the museum to create activities on a short time frame and with a fresh group of people working together. What was that like? And we're going to spend a little bit of time hearing from them.
All right, good afternoon again, and thanks for participating and joining us to discuss this. And Coach Rob, feel free to interject as I talk through this. I think when I was first asked to be part of this project, David reached out and said, would you like to be a part of this project that is trying to create or provide an activity that ties STEM to racial justice? And I remember thinking that that is probably something that is not possible, or something that I had never thought about, right? That particular intersection. So I agreed to be part of the group, 1, because I am very passionate about racial justice. Secondly, because I'm an educator and for a long time was in the STEM field, and I was a science teacher, and I just never really thought through how those 2 intersect. So it was exciting to be, 1, asked, because it provided the ability to be seen, right, to be heard, to be honored in that way. But also it was a unique opportunity to put 2 things together that in my mind just did not go together. So getting together for the first time was interesting because we had community members from this kind of very different communities, from the Twin Cities, from Rochester, from Fargo-Moorhead. So that was the number 1 thing that I would point out, how nice it was to get to meet people from around Minnesota who had similar interests or similar passions. The other part of it too was getting to know David and Choua and the rest of the team, and having conversations with them that I probably would never have had other opportunities to have those conversations. But when we first started the project, I will say that I wasn't quite sure what we were hoping or planning to do. And so the first couple of meetings, that was what the conversation was about. Like, what is it that we're hoping to accomplish in this? And there was maybe a lot of clarification questions that had to be asked to get to the point where we really understood that we were trying to come up with an event or activity that somehow reflected our unique perspectives and our life experiences and culminated in this project or activity that we could use within our own community and hopefully broader than that, right? That would provide perspectives and education on that intersection between racial justice and STEM. And so once we had our big group meeting, we were able to have an opportunity to meet with our smaller groups from our own regions. That provided time for us to get to know each other, to share our identities and unique perspectives, and then to really ask ourselves, what is it in our own lived experiences that we felt maybe was never covered, right? Or was never taught, or something that we wish we could broadcast to the general public when it came to racial justice and how it intersects with STEM. And so those conversations, I think, were good to have because we got opportunities to share things that maybe we experienced throughout our own educational experiences, or things that we've experienced in our community, or in my particular perspectives, things that I've experienced as a woman of color who is also an immigrant, who is an educator, right? And what is it I wish that people knew or understood? So I found this experience to be good in that it had me think through maybe intersections that I had never thought through before, but beyond that, kind of work in a collaborative way with people who had shared similar experiences, and then to come up with a project. And that was the interesting part, trying to come up with we had about 10 different ideas, right? And trying to narrow those down to the one particular one that we all felt would be the most important to share with our own communities. And then also do that in a way that would have an impact, not only on our own communities, but on the community at large. So there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of guidance from the STEM team that was working with us to kind of keep us going forward. It was good to be asked questions that we had never asked ourselves. And Coach Rob, I think you can agree with me on that. But I think the best part of the entire project was not only being asked questions so that somebody else could go and produce something, but being asked questions so that we could be part of creating something ourselves. Because a lot of times I think when people do community engagement or community outreach, they ask questions of the community and then go back and create or produce a product, right? And I think that was my initial thought. But I realized with time that we were being asked questions, and then there was the added expectation of participating in creating this product. And so it provided to me a very new meaning on what inclusion looks like, because we usually think about inclusion as active participation in a process. And in this particular case, inclusion was, we are going to kick you right in and have you be part of the process and the product that is created. So Coach Rob, go ahead and add into whatever it is that I might have missed out on.
Well, the process was not only very intriguing, but there was so many challenges, especially when you are bringing so many personalities together with so many different skill sets, and trying to make them all blend in so that those personalities and those skill sets could produce something without ego. You know what I'm saying? And as we began to work through the process, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the way that David, he not only came beside us and helped us through the project, but he became a coach. He helped us to be able to look at things from a very different perspective. He helped us to look at some of the questions that we were asking of ourselves, and then he would pose those questions to us to get us to think in a very different way. And that was something that was something that I had not experienced prior to this, because me being a facilitator and me doing trainings, you're always the one asking questions, but when you're on the other side of that table and someone is asking you, what types of things that the types of things that you would ask someone else, it becomes a very different shoe. And so as we went through this process, we began, we were allowed to look at the process from our own standpoint, and then we move towards it. It wasn't someone saying to us, hey, this is, this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to do it. It was, okay, you choose, you come up with the solutions. I mean, he actually grew us out. He actually said, okay, so what is the goal? What are you trying to achieve? What do you want this to do? Then he started asking us, okay, so what is the reality? What can we really do in the time frame that we have? And then he helped us move through obstacles. He helped us to understand, what would be the objections? What are the things that, might get in the way? And then he said, how can I help you? In what ways can I support you in making this become a reality? And so he pushed us to think outside the box, because normally when you think about projects like this, you start thinking in terms of, okay, it's just another project that we're going to be looking at, and they're going to get their data, and then once they get their data, this is just a one and done. But with the type of project that he helped us to move around and to create, he helped us to really stick our teeth into something that was going to be that we could use later on, something that could be disseminated throughout our community and to other communities. And that was the unique part about this project. He was that guide. He was a guide on the side, but not a sage on the stage, so to speak. And the partnerships that we really connected throughout our team, we saw where each of us had our own very distinct abilities, our very unique characteristics. And those were the things that really pushed us to create this very unique project. We wanted something that would have an impact and that wouldn't scare people away, but would really draw people in and want them to be able to participate, to want them to really talk about this. And then we wanted them to really have that connection by having the conversations. We wanted to take away all of the fear and all of the doubt that comes along with talking about DEI issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really just focus on how can we do this together? How can we talk about this without all of the thunder and lightning and all of the other things that normally get in the way of being able to have really great dialogue? So, yeah, that's it.
Easy to do. David, do you want to jump in now? I have the next slide for you, but if you start now, then I think Chao and Coach Rob can get one more word in before we switch to how we did the research. Is that okay, folks?
So
Nope,
I think one thing that is commonly discussed in museums right now is that museums don't really know how to do collaborative work with communities of color. We talk about collaborative projects or co-creating, but typically museums do this thing where it's like, if the project is about racial justice, we as a museum define what racial justice is about. We choose who's going to be involved, we identify what it is we want to do, we design the project, and then we bring people in to do a role that we've decided they can serve. And oftentimes, if the work is surrounding race and culture, we end up tokenizing folks, bringing them in for the color of their skin or their cultural background, without really seeing what their needs are or what their perspective is on what needs to be done in the work. And so I think what was kind of difficult about this project is there wasn't a roadmap. We all talk about these problems, but we don't know what genuine collaboration does look like. And so the first half of this project was really centered around getting to know you, which is who are you? What are your passions? What skills do you have? Where are you connected? What resources do you like to use? And I feel like teams don't work well together without that common understanding of who's on a team and what racial justice means to them. And so creating that internal, with each group, their own vision of what that looks like was a lot of work over that first bit. And then moving from there into what communities are you hoping to reach out to? Do your identities make you want to design work for immigrant communities? Do you want to design work that surrounds disparities between students of color in the educational system? Do you want to talk about incarceration? Like, what is it that you care about, and what communities are you aiming to have an impact on? And then specifically, what are those impacts? What does success look like? How do we measure success? And so I was like pretty insecure for the first half of this project because we're doing a lot of talking about these things. We'll have a whole 2-hour meeting and we're not talking at all yet about what is the activity we want to do? What do we want to design? What's it going to look like? And you start to feel like without getting into that early that you're going to lose people. But I think it was really valuable in creating connections between people and having them really invest themselves. And then while they're getting to know each other, I'm over here taking notes like, oh, this person is really good with this. Maybe they'd be interested in serving this kind of role. Maybe they want to be a speaker. Maybe they want to be behind the scenes designing something. Maybe they want to manage the budget. Looking at what people care about and how they react in meetings and trying to structure activities around them. So even before we got into activity brainstorming, there were talks about like, what roles do we have? What skills do we have? And what skills are we missing in this project? What are things we might need to outsource? How much might those things cost? Because when you're kind of going without this map, I think a danger is planning too big or too expensive and not really thinking about what you have available to you. And so I wanted to have a lot of general conversation that wound up narrowing the focus of the group naturally. And then I think the other pivotal thing for me was like power sharing. So for that first like half, it's me setting the agendas, facilitating, getting everyone talking. But eventually, if we're doing genuine co-creation and collaboration, there has to be a point where I pass off some of the power, the decisional power that I'm holding to these community members. And so we had conversations about that as well. Like, how much bandwidth do you have? What are months where you're going to be really busy? Like, how much do you want me to do? Do you want me to keep making agendas? Do you want to make the agendas? And I think in those conversations, some lessons would be that, like, if you're working with people who are students or already have full-time jobs, museums might wind up still serving that logistical role of continuing to schedule, continuing to design, because folks have bandwidth and we're paying them for this project, but that doesn't mean we can add more hours to their day. People only have so much time. And so I think with each group, there was a responsibility to be adaptable to what it is that they needed, and to be aware of where there were going to be situations where I need to step in more and contribute more, and where there were going to be situations where strong personalities or strong ideas require me to step back and listen more and help everyone involved in the project get what they need out of the project. And then once we got brainstorming, it was off to the races. And then your role becomes a lot of, hey, sent you an email on Friday. We got this deadline for this time. Y'all set that deadline. I didn't set the deadline. And I want to make sure we're all meeting the things that it becomes a lot more, not to be patriarchal, but a little bit of like babysitting, a little bit of like, hey, let's all stay on track. Let's all meet up here. We need to throw in an extra meeting if we're going to meet this deadline. But I think that can be more manageable when they know you and you know them, and they know that you care about the project and them. And you start to get a sense that they care about you as well, and they want you around in more than just that museum power holding, money dealing out role. So that's a lot what it was like. It's still ongoing. Projects are going out into communities across Minnesota, Rochester, Fargo-Moorhead, Twin Cities. And it's been quite the process with a lot of lessons. I've really enjoyed it.
So before we turn over to describing the research and how we made the research match the project, Chao or Coach Rob, is there anything, one more sentence that you want to add about the activity development?
I would say, just reflecting back on what David said, that this project made me realize that there was a lot of learning to do on both ends when you're talking about co-creating. You know, he talked about power sharing and how important that was to shift that. And it wasn't just discomfort on his end, it was also discomfort on our end, because we're not accustomed to being given those reins, right? And so that it was learning on both of our ends on how co-creation actually works.
Yeah, and along with that, it's just that, you know, you set these goals and you set your mind up to do something and you really want to accomplish it, and then all of a sudden life happens and you're like trying to scramble to meet these deadlines, and you're trying to say, okay, look, I need to get into these meetings. And what was so unique was normally you would have individuals who would be at a bickering and things like that. But the team came together and stepped in where they needed to. And that, I think that was primarily because of how the field was set when we began. It wasn't a competition, but we learned how to affirm each other.
Thank you. I really wanted to make sure on this project that you all had a sense of what the work we were doing before we got into the research. Because I hope that everyone can see that with the goals for co-creation and for power sharing that were inherent in the work of the project itself, the research had to be designed to match it. And so this was a project funded by the National Science Foundation. We knew that research was going to be part of it. And we also, for us within the museum, care passionately about learning from our experiences. And so I'm going to ask Choua now to talk about how we made that happen, how we redistributed power with the research, and what this actually looked like at the nitty-gritty level.
Thanks, Marjorie. Okay, so when I was preparing for this webinar, I was like, there's so much that I would love to share, and we just don't have enough time to share it all. And so, I mean, really what we're sharing with you all is just a sliver of things that have been going on. And if anything intrigues you, if anything makes you curious, I would encourage you to dig into that and to really think about what that means for your own work. So I just wanted to just say that, is that, you know, we're not here to be like, here's the answer. The answer is, right? We're trying to just share things we've tried. And I love that, like, Chao and Coach Rob and David talked extensively at first about like the programming aspects, because I think that kind of insight is not something that a lot of researchers or evaluators may have maybe privy to, right? And so like hearing this is, I think, something that is very important and it's very insightful. And like Marjorie said too, I agree that we knew that the research, going in, we knew that the research had to match the program. Because if it didn't, then it doesn't get at what the title of this webinar is, which is about authentic collaboration. And that authentic collaboration isn't only the responsibility of the programming person on the project or the community members. I mean, we as researchers, we thought really hard and deep even before starting this project about what does authentic collaboration really mean when it comes to doing research. And so I'm gonna kind of like go big up here, and then the next slide will be like actual strategies and actual things that we tried and what it looks like in practice. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because this helps set up the ways that we decided to do our research. And so, you know, I think Chao might have said it when she had mentioned the word power sharing. And I think that that's really like the flip side, right, of like co-creation and co-research, that it really is about an acknowledgement of power, and that you want to come into this kind of project or this kind of a way of thinking about doing things in a way that really is going to disrupt these dominant and these historical ways that research has been done to communities, especially when we think about our BIPOC communities, where folks have been disenfranchised and exploited and used without any say in what is being done to them. And we knew that coming in, we did not want to replicate that. And so that means that we had to do some deep thinking about how we want to approach research and how do we want to make it so that it feels like an inviting space for people to come in and to be there to co-research and to co-create together. And that it's authentic. It's not just us saying it, but that we show it and we live it by how we do the work and what we say to people and the kinds of results that we get. You'll probably also see that you got to be ready for a lot of work. It's asking folks to really step out of what we probably traditionally think of research and evaluation to be in terms of like your scope of work. And it's asking folks to really think hard about what is the work that you're willing to put in, independent of the work that you're going to be doing, collecting data and coming up with instruments. It's all these other things that impact those kinds of things as well too. And I mean, the reason why it's hard is because what we're trying to do is we're trying to disrupt these dominant ways of being, right? I mean, we're trying to disrupt like white supremacy culture. And so that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of thinking. It takes a lot of coordinating and thinking hard about what you mean when you say certain kinds of things. And like David kind of mentioned, right? I wrote this down, there isn't a recipe for like social justice and liberation and like participatory research and co-creation and co-research. There's no recipe on the internet that you can just be like a dash of this and a dash of this and then boom, take it out of the oven and here's your authentic collaboration. And so you have to be ready to really be flexible, have a lot of room and space for growth and learning and ambiguity. And a lot of that is something that we also have to hold when we're doing the research as well too. And that this is really also about building relationships. Marjorie knows this because she works with me closely. Building relationships is something super important to me. It's how I think about the work that I do as a researcher, that it's not just about coming in and getting the information that I need, but that this is a partnership. This is a relationship that I'm building for the long run. And when we're thinking about social justice and we're thinking about racial justice in particular and systemic inequities and systems of oppression, like you've got to be in it for the long run, right? Or, if you're not in it for the long run, then other things can happen, and that it's about building relationships, which is why, exactly like David said, we spent so much time in the beginning really building that foundation in order for us to be able to take off running when the time came to it. And that we as researchers saw that as important too, and that we also contributed to building those relationships. So Marjorie, you can go ahead to the next slide. So here are three takeaways, I suppose, if you want, about like, what does that mean to translate that into practice? I kind of have already done a little bit of it by, framing all of these things before I went to this particular slide. And so, first one, acknowledge and name the history at the start and declare our intentions, right? Again, right, talking about you acknowledge that, especially when it comes to BIPOC communities, like they don't have a reason to trust you, especially based on past historical experiences with research. And I put the research in quotes because there's different ways to think about what research is, right? If we think about traditional and historical ways of doing research, it's definitely very much heavily leaned towards extractive research on and not research with communities. And so a resource that you all can use to think about what we said when we actually talked about the history of research and declared our intentions for flipping the ways that research can be done, is we had a PowerPoint at the beginning of our project, and we spent a significant amount of time really talking and naming all of those things, and from the beginning. So it wasn't like 5 months later when it seems like there was some problems. No, we like from the get-go, like called that out and like said, yes, we know that this is how research has been used. That's not what we want to do here. Here's how we aspire and hope to have research be done in this project and be with us throughout this process. So yeah, on the STEMRJ website, you can go in there and you can find this resource. The second one is really thinking about and identifying the expertise brought by different parties, right? That it's not just the researchers who come in and have expertise, but that community members, RPGMs, they know their communities, they know their lived experiences, they can imagine how things might go much better than I can because I'm not the one in their communities with their folks every day. And so our expertise then lies in, right, like we know how to build a survey, we can figure out how to complete and submit and get IRB approval. We can draw on our past experiences conducting research. And so you've got to figure out a way to really hold space for all of this. And in this particular principle, there's that idea of like decentering yourself, right? And that it's not about what do you want and need from this as a researcher, but also like, how does the community feel? How do our RPGMs feel? I think we spent a lot of time, Marjorie and I especially talked a lot about like, how do we want our RPGMs to feel in this project? We want them to feel invited. We want them to feel like we look at them from an asset-based perspective, that they have the capacity and the competency as is. Nobody, you know, we don't have to teach them to be this, or you don't know how to write a survey. Let me just do it and make sure that you distribute it or something. So I also have a PSA announcement, right, around expertise. And it's not, I don't think Chao and Coach Rob said it, but, you know, by expertise, like recognizing expertise, it definitely also means paying people what they're worth, right? And so that means that, you know, you acknowledge their expertise, you acknowledge their wisdom and the knowledge that they bring, and you see that as valuable, and people should be honored as such. So you don't just go to communities and say, hey, you want to be a part of this for free? You know, like don't like hard stop right there, right? Like, what does it mean to really like say that we honor your expertise? At least I feel like that's the least you can do, is to pay people, because otherwise, you know, like, right, we like a lot of times you put your money where your mouth is. And so we know that, you know, in this society especially, money means a lot of different things. So it's just one way, right, to honor expertise. The other way, obviously, of course, is decentering yourself, creating space, making sure that the language that you use is also reflecting the ways that you view communities from an asset-based perspective and how you talk about communities. And then we have a resource again on the STEMRJ website that is the consent document, which I think, Marjorie, this is like the actual informed consent form that we used and had people read and sign. And in that consent document, we actually wrote things like this. We know that you bring wisdom and knowledge from your lived experiences, et cetera, which is, I think, not always what I see in consent forms. It's a lot more legal, researchy type language. And we were like, we have to name this because we need to be transparent about it from the get-go. And then that brings me to my last point, which is transparency of process throughout. And by transparency, I don't mean, hey, we sent you that email, did you read it? But you're actually really, truly like, one of our advisors for our other project, another project said this, and I really love it because I think that it really encapsulates what this means, is that you have to make so she was talking about our research questions in particular for this other project, and she said you have to make the research questions transparent in a pedagogical way. And so you can take that research questions out and fill in the blank with anything else, right? Like you can make the survey instrument development transparent in a pedagogical way, right? You're not just asking people, and Chao will know this because I asked like 20 questions about one particular thing, is that when they say, oh, we want to learn about this, you're not just like, okay, I'm going to take it away now and I'm going to do all this thing and then I'm just going to come back and say, this is the question. No, I'm going to say, what do you mean by learning? Tell me what you're interested in. Are you interested in confidence? Are you interested in this? Are you interested in this? And it helps them to really be able to think deeply in a different way too, through what they're trying to get. So We also like we invite people into the process, and we actually, we didn't just say, hey everybody, you can be a co-researcher. We actually thought deeply about what that looks like. And so we gave people plenty of opportunities to opt in, opt out, step back, step in, do whatever works for them, and still also be able to participate. And so on the website again, there is this co-research timeline activities document that we created. It's really simple, but, well, you think it's simple, but it's information that we have that the RPGMs didn't have, right? And it was information we were using to make decisions on our end, but we have to also make sure that they have that information so they can also make decisions on their end. Because what we do is definitely going to impact what they do as well too. And so again, just thinking through that. And then a real story about this is also at the beginning of the project, we didn't explicitly make, we didn't explicitly in our IRB say that we were going to be gathering data from youth under 18, but throughout the project, it became apparent that that demographic was really important to certain regional groups in order to collect information about their experiences. And so rather than Marjorie and myself and the research team just saying, well, we don't have time, that's nice, but whatever, you have 2 youth, that's not important. We actually said, no, what? If it's important to the community members, if it's important to RPGMs and their regional groups, then it's important, like full stop. Like there's no justification. And so then what we did was we said, okay, so if it's important, let's talk to them about why and how we need to get IRB approval again, so that again, they understand what's going on our end. And so we didn't make this decision, the community members did. And then the other last thing I'll say is, and Coach Rob and Chao knows this, like while we were doing data collection around what we called paired conversations, so it was 2 RPGMs like talking to each other, I shared my screen. They got to see my notes. They got to see like things that I had highlighted as like, oh, I got to make sure that I say this. I gave them, we sent the questions in advance. And then I also gave them an opportunity to even practice together, because I realized that it wasn't just about collecting data. There was a couple of very different things going on. They were building relationships with each other. It's making known what we were doing. So I'll stop there because I could keep going on forever. But yeah, these are some of the ways that this is like the things I was talking about gets translated into practice.
So now I would like to hear from Chao and Coach Rob. How did what Choua described feel to you? And we're running just a tiny bit behind on time, so maybe we'll be a little quicker here so we can have some time for Q&A, but I know you both are articulate, smart geniuses who are able to pull out some threads for us here that will help us make sense of this all. And it's such an important issue, again, because we know the history of research and the way that it's been experienced, particularly by BIPOC people, is that is what we were working to undo here. So your honest feedback is exactly what we all need.
Well, I can say in a very succinct way that it was the validation that kept us, that kept me involved. It was the validation and the understanding of what I brought to the table. And then what was more interesting was how that validation was spread throughout our entire team. And that was very important to me.
And I would just say, yes, Choua is right. She does ask about 500 questions. But in asking those questions, I think it provided me like a different perspective on what research looks like. You know, I shared that I was a science teacher and research was very lab oriented, very regimented. And if you had to do just so in order for it to actually be research. And I think doing it this way with Choua kind of changed my mind about what research can be. And I think the rigidity sometimes of what science and research has been in the past has excluded BIPOC folks who by culture maybe have a different way of learning, understanding, and sharing. And I think this process validated those differences and allowed us to kind of progress in a way that worked for us. So I wrote down that it changed my perception from confused to intrigued to skeptical, excited, and then empowered and appreciated. So that's my 2 cents.
And I just put in chat, but I realized I should just say it out loud. One, as Choua said, she created a sort of a roadmap for what the research was going to be like to allow people to opt in and opt out. And at the very beginning, both Chao and Coach Rob said that they would be interested in dissemination about the project. And so they were at the top of Choua's list when we started arranging for this webinar. We already knew who was interested and who to go to at the beginning. And that to me was one of the genius moves that Choua made, was to just name the steps and say to people, you can opt in, opt out to different steps, but we hope you're going to opt into enough of it to be part of things. I want to give the whole team just a sort of final moment to say a word about the project, and then we are going to switch to Q&A. And there's already been some cues coming in through the chat, and I'm sure there's more out there. I would say for me, this work, we all know what we should be doing. We all know that research should be with and creation should be with and not on or for. And the reality of it is hard and it takes time. But it also, every time I hear somebody else who's doing a project like this, it's the little nuggets about how to do it that make it possible. Because we do all get used to doing things in our organizational and institutional ways and in our white-centered and white supremacy-oriented ways. And so for me, this project has been a chance to practice what I believe and to develop some new skills to be able to do that.
I think I would just say that, like, if you want a project to move really fast with very low risk and no uncertainty, then like keep doing community engagement the way community engagement is commonly done in museums. But if you want to have a more genuine experience with the communities around you, especially communities that your institutions have historically left behind, then you need to prepare for a longer process, a more genuine process, a process with vulnerability, a process where you are navigating around people's schedules and the things that pop up in their lives. And allow, like, obviously don't aim for failure, but allow the risk of failure in the interest of doing genuine work with people and being a real person with people. These systems that we navigate internally in museums do not encourage individuality, I don't think. And I think individuality is what gives strength to community projects. That who Chao is and who Coach Rob is and who I am matter just as much to this project as what it is we're trying to produce. And our ability to work together in the future and our willingness to work together into future all hinges on that. And so don't look at things from like an individual project, gotta get it done, check the box lens. Look at your projects from like, what are these relationships? Where do we want them to go? And what are our goals and our impacts that we want internally with the community members we're working with and with the communities they serve.
I think one of the things that really that one should go into this with is being able to change your perspective, because, you know, perspective, when you're looking at perspective, when you're looking at failure, you have to look at it from, is this a fear-based type of failure where you are, you know, there's fear and there's, you know, there is anxiety and insecurity and lackadaisical, you know, approach. But if you look at it from a strategic failure, meaning, you know, there is a freedom there, you know, there is a sense of, you know, what are the answers? You know, what answers will we get to? It's, you know, it's okay. Let's do this. What is this inquiry about? And, you know, what can we, what what can we learn from this? Because everything that you put into this and everything that you gather from this is going to give you something to work on. It's going to give you something to work through. And when you understand that, changing your perspective helps build and push you towards a project and to a collaboration that is going to yield greater success.
We have a question about next steps in the chat. It's 1:22 in Minnesota Central Time, so I just want to do a quick moment. I actually would love for Chao or Coach Rob to talk first about your sense of next steps. This was a 12-month project, and I will ask David to answer this question, but I would love to start from a community member perspective. What are the hopes and dreams that you would have for future collaborations or future projects with the museum?
Well, if we're talking about, the project that we're currently working on, we're looking to have this project do something that brings folks together. We're calling it Not So Trivial Pursuit. And it's a project that asks questions about, what does it look like? Do we really know what's offensive to others? Do we really understand what, the terminology surrounding DEI looks like? Being able to get this into the hands of other counties and other places and into their libraries, that really helps to really bring a different emphasis. It helps to take off some of those things that push it down, that push down our conversations, and really to help build it up. So I think that the next steps for, in terms of being able to collaborate, say, okay, this was hard and this was challenging, but now that we've seen what this success can do, what we've seen this success can bring, we know that there's so much more that can be done. And we know that hard projects doesn't necessarily mean impossible projects.
I don't know how I follow up on that. I think Coach Rob summarized that well. The only thing I would add to that is, even though this project was limited in the sense that we were developing this activity that we're going to share with our community and beyond, the skills that each and every one of us have acquired from this get taken to our communities and our organization, our workplaces, right? So the idea of this process being replicated by each and every person, wherever they go, I think is massive.
Absolutely. So in terms of where we're at, the Fargo Moorhead group has already delivered their youth leadership development program. It went really well. The youth responded to it really well, and we'll be looking at the data from that over the next couple of weeks and making some meaning out of that. The Twin Cities Metro group has recorded 4 or 5 episodes of a 7-episode run of a mini podcast, like a mini series. And they're looking at the intersections between activism and life after incarceration, activism and a youth-led response to the murder of George Floyd, activism in STEM jobs. And so those are being edited right now, and we have a panel event this upcoming weekend with some of the youth from that youth-led response to the murder of George Floyd project. And we'll be getting some data from surveys on the podcast and possibly from participants in the event this weekend. And then the Rochester group, Chao and Coach Rob's group, we are having, hopefully, I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to test the website version of the board game this Friday. Next Friday, we're testing it with the communities to do any final tweaks to it. And then we will be putting out the website and using the remainder of the budget to create physical copies of the game so that we can distribute them to libraries or other organizations that are identified as really great targets for this. After that, it, as Choua is saying in the chat, a lot of meaning making of the data, dissemination, and hopefully looking for further funding to continue doing projects with this, like this with community members across Minnesota.
And one of the goals of this, of course, is continued work with these groups, but also because these products are jointly owned, they're not just sort of things that go onto the museum floor. They can be shared and used and disseminated by anybody in the project. So, you know, Coach Rob and Chao can create their own group independent of the museum and take over the world with not so trivial pursuit. It's not a thing that is owned by the museum. It is, you know, it's theirs. And we are excited to share it and disseminate it and support it in whatever way we can. But I think that creates a different kind of set of possibilities.
Yeah. Last thing I would say about that is that was a super intentional thing on our end from the beginning. We had conversations about what data sharing looks like and what kinds of information belong to whom. And I, you know, and that we could go, you know, that could be another webinar, but we've had those conversations as well too.
We had one more question, which was answered in chat. Yes, this project was done 100% virtually, which was terrifying to all of us as we imagined it last summer. And we are hoping to have a final in-person event where we can actually all be in the same space with each other. That will be marvelous. It's been a lot of screens. I'm watching the chat and there's both notes and there's a little push from Josh for creating a roadmap. I would say the metaphor may not be a roadmap, but I think that a goal of this team is to create some orientation materials of some kind. So we're gonna have to think about, is it a roadmap or is it some other, is it a compass? Is it, you know, is it learning how to read the constellations? What is the metaphor that is right when you don't know exactly where you're going to, but you know what the process, you need the process to feel like as you go. I want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Erica, and thank you, CARE, for hosting us. And thank you so much to my co-presenters who came together and shared their experience with this project. We appreciate you so much. Erica, can I kick it back to you? Is there anything you need to do to close?
No, thank you so much for being here and presenting this amazing project. Well, 3 projects to us and sharing your experiences. It's been fantastic. And I really appreciate your time, all of you. Thanks so much. We'll see you later.